Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, Survival is back once more. I won't spend as much time explaining what the event is since players are hopefully familiar with it by now. I'll give you some highlights before character analysis and recommendations. A quick shout out to FMG who has been invaluable in putting this together. His referral code is on screen as a thank you. The protagonist for this event is Lucius the Eternal, the champion of Slaanesh. The event starts on August 3rd and runs for a week. You start with 2 tokens, and the token refresh rate is 12 hours. Therefore, over the 7 days, you will have 15 tokens as a free-to-play player. You bring Chaos characters as allies alongside Lucius against a host of the Aeldari. This means you get access to the Thousand Suns, World Eaters, Black Legion, and Death Guard. Sadly, this time around we don't get to try any extra Emperor's Children characters like we did with the Trajan event. Before we get into things, let's talk a little bit about the protagonist. This will be our first time playing with Lucius. The thing that makes him most appealing for survival is his passive, which we'll cover briefly. When an enemy kills Lucius, it receives a permanent debuff that causes it to lose life every turn. On that unit's death, Lucius resurrects to fight once more, making him unkillable except under the most niche circumstances. Other than that, he is quite mobile with a movement of 4, can deal reasonable damage, especially after you've completed the missions that give him extra stats. When Lucius dies, you get to deploy another character, and then when he resurrects through his passive, you have 6 characters to fight with. The only way you permanently lose Lucius is if the elated unit dies on a yellow spawn point while completely surrounded. If you want a more in-depth analysis about Lucius, go check my showcase video linked in the description. The rewards for this event are carrion character shards alongside some other Adeptus Custodes goodies. I'll quickly cycle through the chest rewards on screen. Remember that you have a string of missions you can complete to increase the stats of the protagonist, up to a maximum of 140% bonus health and damage. On screen now are the enemies that you will expect to fight, as well as the power-ups for different levels. I'll give you a summary later on. For this survival, there is a single resurrect power-up. Depending on the timing of usage, you can potentially get up to 7 characters, as Lucius can resurrect through his own passive. It's also worth pointing out that we get plenty of ability refresh power-ups, which are invaluable for our summoner characters to repeatedly create armies of supporting units. As we get to the legendary waves, we start to fight against enemy-controlled Aeldari characters. Wave 15 is comprised of a super strong Moggan Ra with range 4 and 11 similarly overpowered Wraith Guards. I've repeatedly made the comment that Wave 15 has supposedly been unkillable, but then my friend General Zod has gone on and beaten every single survival so far. There are ways to make a dent on that last wave, and I'll touch on that later. In case you didn't catch everything as I was scrolling through it, here's a summary slide of all the enemies and power-ups, sorted by level and rarity. We've seen all of these Aeldari enemies in the Saimhan Mirror campaign. However, we're probably not used to the nuances that come from facing them in a rarity-capped and wave-based mode. I've given you a quick look summary of everyone here before getting into the details. With the arrival of this survival, there have been 2 changes to the functionality of the Aeldari. The first is that the Wraith Guard's passive ability, Wraith Cannon, can now only damage enemies. It used to be that you could get the Wraith Guard to kill their allies with careful positioning, but that is no longer possible. The second change is that the Aeldari Guardians are less likely to just spam their Plasma Grenade ability as soon as they spawn. It's a nice change and helps make these units slightly less overwhelming when they spawn in numbers. There are 2 takeaways when you fight these enemies. The Aeldari have several abilities that punish you for bunching together. It provides an interesting bit of tension since you generally want Rotbone to be close to your characters to heal and revive them. The Guardians and Harlequins are quite mobile through use of their abilities, and this can create scenarios where they steal power-ups you thought were safe. For the Harlequins in particular, don't put any character adjacent to a power-up that you want to save for later. The variance in this survival is pretty big, since a lot of the Aeldari have a crit chance. In this video, you can see Malladus taking several attacks that do very little damage, but the ones that crit take almost his entire life in one go. A couple of these bad luck crits can ruin your run before it even gets going. Before we move on to the map, the key wave to defeat for this mode is level 11. Defeating the enemies of this wave gives you 3 legendary experience books. You can see here the stats for the enemies on that wave. This event runs concurrently with the anniversary event, where you get points for each wave cleared, so you are incentivized to go as far as possible in each run. On screen now are the stats for the enemies for level 15, the supposed impossible to complete level. We'll look at how we might approach that later. This is the map that we play on with the elevation of each hex and the impassable edges clearly marked. Enemies enter from these 4 spawn points, and these 5 hexes in the middle are where your characters start. This is a relatively small map, and the power-ups all spawn in the middle. That helps us since the chaos units are generally quite slow. There are several spots of high ground in the middle as well as barbed wire, restricting the entrance of enemies, and this time around there are no units that like to hang back, so you can either restrict the fight to the middle of the map, or split your forces north and south while going back to the center for power-ups relatively easily. Now the bit that you're all waiting for, the tier list and recommendations for this event. As a reminder, these are the desirable traits for a character in a mode like Survival. Here is a snapshot overview of the tier list. I'll leave it on screen for a bit to digest before talking through some of the choices. In the greater good tier we have Corrodius on his own. If you've played any of the previous Survivals where Corrodius has been usable, this probably doesn't need too much explanation. Essentially, he creates an army of poxwalkers that self-replicate with every use of his active. This event gives you multiple opportunities to refresh that active through power-ups, so he's probably the most important character to bring. His passive has slightly more utility than usual. The enemy warlocks occasionally trigger it, and it helps deal some extra out-of-turn damage. In the good tier we have Malladus, Rotbone, and, believe it or not, Harkin. Malladus is always a powerhouse. He can clear up to 3 enemies per turn even more reliably now that the Haze of Corruption bug has been fixed. He also tanks damage really well, not only because he has great defensive stats but also because of his Terminator armor trait. If you load him with all the possible power-ups, he can tank some attacks on the last wave and take a couple of enemies with him on the way out. Rotbone is always a linchpin of any Chaos Survival, since he is the only available healer. Not only does he heal, but he can also revive your characters in a pinch. A surprising addition this time was Harkin. He is here for a simple reason. His damage output can reach ridiculous proportions thanks to how his passive has been reworked, and that allows him to make quite a dent in the last wave, as we'll see later in the gameplay section. I won't talk about all of the characters available here, but highlight some who I think are okay or possibly even good in the right hands. Abraxas is probably the closest to the good tier from this group. He is the second best summoner, and if you don't have a strong Corrodius, then he is the best character to collect those ability refresh power-ups. Archimatos is decent. The Aeldari are fragile, so his passive ability usually generates at least 1 bloodletter per turn. Sadly, the hits power-up has no effect on Smite or Let the Galaxy Burn, so he is unlikely to be able to consistently kill 2 enemies every round unless he grabs a damage power-up. Angrax is better than usual this time around. Although there are 4 spawn points and Angrax can't cover them all, he works because the Aeldari are fragile, so his passive has a better chance of killing them at an equal rarity cap. Also, units like the Guardians do a lot of attack then moves, so we have extra chances to trigger Angrax's passive. Karn can still take out 2 or 3 enemies per turn, which makes him reasonable. I'm just always wary of bringing him due to the friendly fire aspect of his kit. I don't have a huge amount here to add about the other characters. Rask could theoretically provide some nice repeatable shields, but I'm not the biggest fan of the character. Toth is similarly tanky but has low damage and struggles to kill even 1 rarity capped enemy per turn. I think this just reflects how few good Chaos characters there are, which is something that I hope changes with the Emperor's Children release. On to the last wave. There's probably a way to beat the last wave that involves filling the map with lower level enemies. Then you can tank a single exit spawn point with Malladus or similarly resilient unit. Then you just simply slowly chip away at the Wraith Guards. I'll leave that to General Zod or other survival beating enthusiasts. The point is that this time around the stats of the last wave are such that a tanky character can survive a fair number of hits from them. So Malladus can take all the power-ups and hit some Wraith Guards before dying. The offensive power of almost every character is pretty limited, even with all of the damage and hits power-ups piled on. That's where Harkin's passive Headclaimer comes in. Let's take a quick sidestep to see how it works. Headclaimer just counts the number of enemies you have defeated and applies your current Headclaimer bonus to it. So if you have killed 10 enemies in common, uncommon, and rare, when you reach epic you start with 30 stacks, but with the epic rarity damage increase. It lets your damage snowball incredibly quickly, and with the bonus hits power up, killing characters in the legendary wave, you can get a high damage active that does over 10 hits on multiple enemies. That's all I've got for this one. Hopefully it was useful. Thanks to my Patreons for their support, and again to FMG. His code is on screen as a thank you. Bye for now.